Welcome to the Jaco Report. I'm Charles Jaco. For now, Missouri's only clinic offering abortions does remain open, but it could still be closed down. Missouri, of course, has passed one of the nation's most restrictive anti-abortion laws, but this crisis for abortion access isn't about that. It's about state health regulators claiming the clinic somehow threatens women's health. Planned Parenthood accuses the state of Missouri of weaponizing the Department of Health and Senior Services in an attempt to shut down abortion. We'll talk about that today, but mainly we will be hearing from two St. Louis area women who underwent abortions, because in the end, this is all about women and the gut-wrenching and often heartbreaking choices they have to make, especially in a state like Missouri that wants to take away that choice. Joining us today is Jennifer Box, a mother of two from Webster Groves. Last year, she had an abortion after discovering the fetus she carried was at risk for a painful condition that meant she would have either been stillborn or dead within hours of birth. Also joining us is Robin Utz. She underwent an abortion at just over 22 weeks gestation after a 21-week anatomy scan revealed her fetus had a fatal kidney disease. And also joining us is Mevy Mead with Planned Parenthood here in St. Louis. Thank all of you very much for joining us. I appreciate your time. Mevy, I want to start with you. Where do we stand in the regulatory fight between Planned Parenthood and the Department of Health and Senior Services about keeping the clinic open?
So first off, I want your viewers to know that Planned Parenthood doors are open, and a judge has protected their ability to provide all the services, including abortion, at the St. Louis Health Center, the last remaining licensed health center to provide abortion in the state of Missouri. What the state has tried to do is prevent the renewal, the annual renewal of the license. And when we realized to what lengths the state was willing to go, while we have the legislative process passing an abortion ban, they were using the regulatory process to ban abortion. When they realized that there was really no way to renew that license, they went to court. And a judge right now has told the state that they cannot ban abortion in the state through the regulatory process, and so that ability to provide abortion is safe for now. And they also ordered the state, who has been very vague and unprofessional, frankly, in how they've handled the license and the regulatory process, to actually make a decision and tell us what it is they're hesitant about in terms of renewing the license.
Now, is there a deadline on this? Because I know the judge said, look, you guys have got to go through the regulatory process and go through an administrative procedure rather than hauling this into court. What's the deadline of Planned Parenthood dealing with the Department of Health and Senior Services on that?
So one thing I want to say is that our reproductive health services did go through all of the appropriate regulatory process, where they had an inspection. In the inspection, they found some things they wanted the health center to change. They've changed them. The state has actually approved their plan of correction. They have just kept making these vague allegations that they can't renew the license because of some concern. So the judge said, guess what? You have to tell them what those concerns are, and you have to tell them by Friday, June 21st, and then I will figure out how to proceed. So abortion is safe, legal, protected in Missouri until the 21st, or until the judge looks at what the state is saying. We get to look at what the state is saying and respond, and then we'll go from there.
Now, the state has been maddeningly vague about most of this, but they were specific in a few things. They claimed, for example, that there had been, in their words, botched abortions at the Planned Parenthood clinic here, and that some women had left still pregnant even after the abortion procedure. What do you say to that?
So your viewers should know, and want them to know, that abortion is an extraordinarily safe procedure. It's one of the safest procedures they do in medicine, with a 98% safety record. So that means that there are 2% of the procedures where there's some complication. And that complication can include the fact that not everything is removed from the uterus, and people need to come back in and have a re-evacuation. Very, very, very rarely in that situation does the pregnancy continue, but it does happen. And all the safety report, or excuse me, the complication reports are filed. There's no allegation that the health center wasn't keeping track of that and wasn't taking immediate care of those people. So there is actually no health concern related to that. All the procedures are being followed. Planned Parenthood's #1 goal is around health and safety and delivering high quality care, and monitor that care and provide that care consistent with the national averages around the incredible safety of that care.
So this happened, but it was among the 2% where things occasionally go wrong, yet the state is trying to hang its hat on that and say this is the reason that this should be closed.
They actually, honestly, have never. They're required to write up a deficiency when they find one in their regulatory process, but they have turned the regulatory process on its head. And instead of using it to find things that might be improved for health and safety, they've actually used it to move goalposts around and impose medically unnecessary, damaging things like an extra pelvic exam 72 hours prior to the abortion.
Even if they're getting a pill abortion. I mean, I've heard that compared to sexual assault rather than being medically necessary.
It's a state-mandated, medically unnecessary, invasive exam of the vagina. The doctors refused last year when the state moved the goalpost around a medication abortion where a woman never has to get undressed to get that care. The state said, yes, we do want you to make her get undressed and use the physician's fingers to insert it into the vagina. The doctor said, no, we're going to refer people out. Then this year, in the March inspection, the state decided, oh, well, let's see if we can make the doctors do that for patients who are getting a surgical abortion at the stage of their consent process where, again, they're not taking off their clothes, they're getting information. It's medically unnecessary, and they have tried to put the physicians in this horrible dilemma where they have to agree to do a medically unnecessary, awful, for everyone procedure in order. They're holding the abortion access hostage to forcing doctors and women to go through this terrible thing, and that's what's happening right now.
Jennifer, could you briefly tell us your story? You're a mom of two, right?
I am.
What happened, if you could briefly walk us through this pregnancy that had to be terminated. When was it? What happened? When did you find out what? And what did you have to go through?
Yeah, so 2 days before Christmas in 2017, I got a positive pregnancy test. At that time, my boys were not quite 3 and not quite 1. So we were very excited, but also a little overwhelmed to have a 10-month-old and find out we were pregnant. And everything in my previous pregnancies had gone fine. So we went in at around 8 weeks for our first appointment. And because I'm over 35, I did genetic testing, which I had done in my previous, with my second child too, because I was over 35 in that pregnancy. I went in, I did the blood work, and about 2 weeks later, I received a call from my OBGYN that the results from that screen showed that the fetus was high risk for trisomy 18.
Which is?
It is a chromosomal abnormality where the fetus has 3 of the 18th chromosome. So you should normally have 2, make a pair. Either my egg or my husband's sperm, they should have each contributed 1 to make the pair. One of them had 2. So we found out at that same time that I was carrying a girl, she had 3 of chromosome 18.
And this would have resulted in what, according to the doctors?
So children with trisomy 18, and just so you know, I did further diagnostic testing to confirm that diagnosis.
Right.
But children with trisomy 18 cannot breathe on their own, they cannot eat on their own, they can't speak, they can't walk, they can't sit up. Most die late in pregnancy, resulting in a stillbirth, or are born and die within hours or weeks of being born. Sorry.
I know, I was wondering, at what point, having received these several genetic tests, at what point in the pregnancy did you decide that I'm going to have an abortion? How far along were you? Do you know?
Well, so we got the results when I was about 13 weeks pregnant, and I got an abortion when I was 15 weeks pregnant.
Now, did you get the abortion here in Missouri?
I did.
Okay, so this would have been, the abortion at 15 weeks would have been perfectly legal here in Missouri when you got it, and under this new law, you'd be a criminal.
Yes, under the new law, I would not have been able to find out about the genetic condition before I passed 8 weeks. At 15 weeks, it was legal in Missouri at that time. However, one of the things that was very difficult for me was the 72-hour consent. When we went to consent with the Planned Parenthood doctor, based on scheduling, because I have to have the procedure done by the same doctor who performs the consent, if I didn't do it on the next available date that provider was available, even though I was 7 weeks out from Missouri's deadline, I would have had to reconsent with a different provider.
Explain this to me, 72-hour consent. What does that mean? You have to tell the doctor and then you have to wait 72 hours to think about it?
Yes. So I met with the doctor. We were obviously in the middle of a crisis, right? This was a pregnancy that we wanted. We didn't even know what trisomy 18 was. Mm-hmm. And so we went to get information to learn what an abortion procedure would be like, what I should expect, everything. And we got a booklet that has medically inaccurate information. My husband and I refer to it as the Book of Shame.
For example, what's in it?
So it has photos at different stages of gestation, and it has what I believe are the state legislators' personal beliefs about what happens at gestation versus relying on established medical science. So it talks a lot about fetal pain and just gives inaccurate information that doesn't help someone make a decision.
And this is a booklet that the state of Missouri required Planned Parenthood to hand out.
Yes, so my abortion was not at Planned Parenthood, it was by a Planned Parenthood doctor, but yes.
Anyone who's going to get an abortion has to get one of these.
You have to get it, and you have to sign, the woman experiencing pregnancy has to sign a consent form that she has received it and that the doctor has gone over that information.
Were you able to get your abortion in that 72-hour period, or did you have to reset the clock?
I didn't. We chose to move forward, but what is ironic is that the state says that I need time to think about this. I wanted time to think about it. This was a very unexpected situation that we found ourselves in. But if I didn't comply with that exact 72-hour waiting period, then I had to go through another consent with which this 2 pelvic exam rule, which was not in effect at the time I did it. I would undergo, I believe, another pelvic exam. And reconsent with a different provider, get that same book again, because if I didn't do it exactly in that 72-hour period, I would fall outside of the legal limits of when I was able to get an abortion in Missouri.
Even before the new law, I mean, how would you characterize a 72-hour waiting period that seems to be needless and a booklet that seems to have propaganda rather than medical information?
It's insulting.
Did you get the feeling that this was all, none of this had anything to do with a woman's health or safety, and all of it had to do with anti-abortion propaganda?
100%. In no way did that information or that waiting period enable me to make a better decision about a medical choice for my pregnancy. It gave me no additional information. It was confusing, deliberately misleading, and trying to shame me. I felt no shame. I knew we were making a merciful and compassionate decision for our child, but the purpose of the waiting period and the booklet and the unnecessary pelvic exams and all of that, which thankfully I did not experience, the pelvic exam part, is simply to shame women and to extract a price from a person who is seeking an abortion.
Robin, let's talk about your story. If you could give us the details. When did your abortion occur, at what stage, what led to it, and the story behind it?
My husband and I had been trying for 4 years to get pregnant, and so we did in vitro twice. We'd had a prior miscarriage, and so we had actually done chromosomal testing on our embryo before we even got pregnant, and we knew that it was a girl and that she had no chromosomal abnormalities such as the trisomy 18. We learned about that to avoid another miscarriage. We just wanted some assurance. And so we were stunned when we went into our anatomy scan at 20 weeks, 5 days, 20 weeks, 6 days, I'm sorry. And the ultrasound technician just got really quiet. And she kept saying, there wasn't a lot of amniotic fluid and that she knew that wasn't what we wanted to hear. And our doctor informed us that our daughter had basically enlarged kidneys with a lot of fluid-filled cysts on them, and there was no amniotic fluid, and that was a problem because basically what happens is the fetus will swallow amniotic fluid and then urinate it out, and that filters through the uterus, and that allows lung development. So
the doctor said if you gave birth with the fetus in this condition, what were the prospects for the child once it was born?
It was 100% fatal because it was a bilateral condition. So we got an immediate...
Fatal pretty quickly.
Fatal, yes. The quote was that the wheels would come off as soon as there wasn't a placenta to support the fetus, unless it was crushed to death by my body without amniotic fluid to protect it.
So this was discovered in an anatomy scan at 21 weeks and change.
20 weeks, 6 days,
20
correct.
weeks, 6 days. And I take it that's the normal time at which this sort of scan would be done. There wasn't anything that would have led anyone or you to have tests done earlier that might have
Correct.
caught this. This was normally scheduled.
It was expressed to us that an anatomy scan is between 18 and 22 weeks. You cannot detect things like this earlier than that. And we almost actually rescheduled it. I had a work meeting that popped up at the same time, and I was like, well, we have a lot of assurance that everything will be fine. Maybe we reschedule, and I didn't end up having to. But had I rescheduled just a routine appointment, we would not have been able to get an abortion in the state of Missouri.
All right, so you're in the position at almost 22 weeks that this was discovered, or 21 weeks that this was
Correct.
discovered. What did you do then? What happened?
So we felt, ironically, that we were lucky that it was 100% fatal. So it enabled my husband and I to make an immediate decision that we needed to terminate the pregnancy. Also, my husband was raised Catholic, and so it really, that 100% is important in this case. And that's when we were informed by our doctors about the upcoming requirements from the state that Jenny has described, where we had to wait that 72-hour period after signing the consents, and we had to do it before 21 weeks, 6 days, which was the legal limit in the state of Missouri. We are also facing an upcoming weekend and the Thanksgiving holiday. This happened, we learned about our daughter's diagnosis 9 days after.
So what did you have to do? I mean, it sounds like you would have had to shifted into gear immediately to get something done.
We
You've got
did.
this 72-hour dead zone where you can't do anything. You're supposed to sit and mull it over. I mean, how difficult was that? How much pressure did you feel under?
An immense amount of pressure. It was really sad. You know, we went back to my parents' house right after this diagnosis, and we were calling family. You know, my husband called his parents to tell them what had gone wrong with this pregnancy, as I'm fielding calls from medical professionals helping me get in to sign these consents. We weren't even allowed time to deal with our shock and grief before we had to deal with state mandated requirements. We, in an ideal world, could have gone home and just grieved and then made the appointments as appropriate and just had it be a very simple process of scheduling a medical procedure. But we were really being forced to deal with the state's requirements at the same time that we were just blown apart by shock and grief.
So you waited the 72 hours. You were able to have the abortion here in Missouri?
Yes,
Here in
one
St.
day
Louis?
before the legal limit.
One day.
Yes,
So had you waited another 24 hours, you wouldn't have been able to have an abortion in Missouri.
correct. Right.
And under the new law, you would have both been criminals.
Yes.
Had something like this happen. I mean, having been through this, how do you react when you see the legislators supporting this, the Republican legislators supporting this, talking about, you know, the sanctity of life and defending the unborn, and that sort of thing, making it seem as if they have claimed the moral high ground in favor of life itself? I mean, how does it strike you?
So when I got the packet Jenny described, there's a line there that says, you know, you are terminating a separate and unique human life. And when I read that, it ignited fury in me, and it prompted me to think that these legislators did not understand our circumstances. And so I've, for a while, started testifying and sharing my story, thinking if they just knew, they would want to write better laws. And it quickly revealed itself to me that they have no interest in writing better laws. The way that the legislators have treated myself and Jenny when we have been testifying has been deeply dismissive. You know, I've had people just ignore me sitting next to them, telling my story in 2 minutes and play with their pen or look at their phone.
Well, I mean, what impression do you come away with then if they're not interested in listening to the stories of women who've gone through this?
Right.
And they're dismissive of everything you say, that what? The fix is in, we're going to outlaw abortion no matter what, and if you don't like it, tough?
Yeah, I mean,
very
I
much
think
so.
that I'm pregnant right now. I'm almost 30 weeks pregnant, and
Everything's going fine.
everything is going fine. It's been very nerve-wracking, but I actually had a breakdown at our 20-week anatomy scan. They couldn't see all the views of the heart. So I had a regular routine appointment at 24 weeks. The doctors weren't concerned, and I broke down in the car with my husband, sobbing hysterically, and I said, at 24 weeks, it will be illegal for me to get an abortion in Missouri. We will have to flee our home state, flee the place where we choose to raise our children, send our children to school. I'm a small business owner, you know, where we pay taxes. Everything that we do to participate in being a citizen of Missouri, we will have to flee our home state if something is wrong with this pregnancy. And thankfully nothing was. But it feels so bizarre to have these people who do not know you do not know the reason that you want an abortion. Robin and I both have somewhat sympathetic stories where we had wanted pregnancies, but people experience pregnancy and wanting to end a pregnancy for a variety of reasons. And the legislator and Governor Parson and Randall Williams don't care why women want to end pregnancies.
Randall Williams being the physician who is the head of the Department of Health and Senior Services.
Right.
The guy was fired as health director in the state of North Carolina. And he is an OBGYN, my understanding is?
Correct.
And you said earlier that as an OBGYN, he should certainly know better.
On all fronts, absolutely.
So,
I mean, on driving here today, I thought, I have offered to meet with Representative Schroer, who sponsored HB 126 in the House.
Representative Schroer, who tweeted that a lot of women falsely claim rape just so they can have a late-term abortion right before their due dates.
Right. He, in an email correspondence with me, referred to my situation as blood money, which I thought was particularly...
Wait a minute. In his email to you?
He said, I said that he didn't treat a representative respectfully at the hearing that I was at. And he said, you know, when talk of all this blood money. And I was like, what an insensitive thing to say to someone who came to testify in Jefferson City about ending a wanted pregnancy. I mean, how insensitive can you be? And he claims proudly to speak for the unborn. And I have said to him in the House and the Senate, when I have testified, I speak for my unborn child, not Representative Schroer, who has never had. I've offered to meet with him, to meet with Senator Koenig, to meet with Senator Bob Onder. None of them. I've offered to meet with the governor. And I would invite any of them to, I'm almost 30 weeks pregnant, so I've got 10 weeks left of prenatal appointments. If they want to come to my prenatal appointments, because they obviously think they can make better decisions about my pregnancy than I can, I would invite them to join me and see what it's like to have a high-risk pregnancy following a fatal fetal anomaly and experience those visits and see if they think that the laws that they're making and the hoops that they're forcing pregnant people to jump through are really about health and safety, when we know they're not, because the governor is not addressing the high maternal mortality rates in Missouri. He's not addressing the syphilis outbreak in Missouri. If you cared about the health and safety of women and children, those would be top priorities.
A final question for all three of you, and feel free to jump in at any point. If it's a given at this point that it doesn't seem a woman's health or safety is the primary issue here, and if a lot of these people are hiding behind semi-religious rhetoric to talk about defending the sanctity of life, personally, what do you think is going on here? Each one of you. I mean, is this religious fundamentalism, sort of an iteration of the American Taliban, or is something else going on here where their minds are made up on this issue? Robin, what do you think?
Oh, I think it comes back to power. They will use whatever justification possible to continue the power structure as it is. There's gerrymandering, that's rife throughout this state. They'll use religious fundamentalism, and it's basically, in my opinion, a form of white supremacy, where they're doing whatever they can to ensure that the power structures where the few dominate the decision-making processes in this state are kept that way. Without regard for separation of church and state, 7 out of 10 people wanting abortion to be legal, or the impacts on the maternal mortality rate and that impacting Black women especially. It's throughout every avenue you can look at to see if this is fair or not. It is demonstrably unfair and cruel.
Jennifer, same question for you. I mean, what's going on here? Do you believe it's genuine religious objections? And if not, what's the underlying motivation that you pick up having dealt with this?
I think it's about their ego. I think they see the changes that happened when Trump became president in the courts and everything. And I think previously the anti-choice movement saw the way to end abortion was a death by many cuts, right? They didn't really think they could overturn Roe. And they see now, as you see it's happening in multiple states across the country, that there's this path, right? And that if they can find the right case and get it to the Supreme Court, they can overturn Roe. And I think, I can only speak to the representatives I've seen in Missouri, but they've flat out said, Representative Schroer said in the House committee meeting, he sees a path to get this to the Supreme Court, and that's his main goal. That's why he's not creating an outright law, he didn't just try to outright ban abortion completely. He started with 6 weeks, and then it got approved past 8 weeks. But there's all these escalating clauses in it, and he said that flat out in the committee meeting. That's his goal, to get to the Supreme Court, and he wants his name on the bill. Is my belief. I think they want to be the heroes of that horrible movement.
Maybe same question for you. If it's not honestly a heartfelt religious objection, what is going on here? What's the foundation to this entire movement that you're picking up?
So I absolutely agree with Jenny and Robin's analysis. I'll just layer in that it's clearly a political motive. It's this political path to be the first state to get to the Supreme Court to have the case that overturns Roe. And what we know is that the vast majority of Missourians support Roe. So I think it's a political overreach. But in Missouri, these elected officials really only have to pay attention to the most conservative primary electorate. So I think the governor is trying to avoid getting a primary from a more conservative or more established politician. As we know, he didn't run for governor. He was appointed or fell into the role. And so I think that he is trying to build up his anti-reproductive health credentials to survive or dominate in a primary. And that is why the people passed Clean Missouri to try and get our redistricting process much more fair, because right now the politicians who are making these decisions, instead of Robin and Jenny and their families and with their doctors, are appealing to the most conservative people because of gerrymandering. We need to hang on to Clean and fix our districting, and then we can have elected officials who actually represent Missourians. And I would say that the power that is unleashed by these extreme bills are something that the politicians didn't count on, and that your viewers really need to get up off the chair, off the couch, out of wherever they are, into the streets and knocking on doors to let your neighbors know these extreme politicians have taken it too far, and that we need to take the democracy and the power back so that we can protect Roe and let these families make these important healthcare decisions.
Thank you all very much for being with us. I really appreciate it. Our thanks to Jennifer Box, to Robin Utz, to Mevy Mead, and of course, our thanks to you for joining us. We hope you can join us here next week for another edition of the Jaco Report. We'll see you then.